everyone. Welcome back to the Earthdawn Survival Guide, the podcast for all disciplines, paths, players, and game masters. With your questers Josh and Dan, I am Dan.
I am Josh.
And on today's podcast, we will be discussing all things threadical, as we're going to talk about the last Parlainth adventure published in the book here called Threads. So if you have any questions for us, please drop us a line at edsgpodcast@gmail.com. Initial thoughts on this one, Josh?
This one is a return to form. The opening adventure in this collection was one that was a traditional Earthdawn dark fantasy fighting a horror adventure.
Yeah, Blood Pact.
Blood Pact, yep. And this one is very similar. The middle two were the more offbeat, lighthearted, darkly whimsical kind of adventures that broke the mold or
not
played with expectations in certain ways.
Yeah.
And this one goes back to a more traditional horror threat. For this one, the threat is scaled up compared to Blood Pact.
Yeah.
This one is best suited for a group of 6 to 8 4th or 5th circle characters. So we're starting to get into journeyman tier.
Yeah. This is heavy duty stuff.
Yeah. And this one plays quite a bit more and has a lot more historical foundations, I want to say, sort of like within the history of Parlainth and what was going on.
Yeah.
And something that has been simmering for a while, but has finally broken and is threatening Haven in a pretty dramatic way.
Yeah, something has come to fruition, and not in a good way.
Yeah.
So this was written by Sam Witt. Has he written anything else for Earthdawn, or was this the only one?
Nothing that immediately comes to mind. I'm sure when this episode goes live, Lou will probably comment if he did write anything else. If he did not write a lot. He might have contributed little bits and pieces here and there.
Fair.
But was not one of the, at least to my recollection, sort of bigger names of writer-contributors to stuff.
That's okay. I think of the four, since this does take place in the 4th and 5th circle, as you said, you got to run this one last out of the four.
Yeah, if you're doing the whole thing. This one also, while it doesn't require the same sort of NPC relationship buy-in that Dead Man's Hand and Desire Box have.
Yeah.
This one does benefit perhaps a little bit by some foreshadowing and build-up in terms of what's going on.
Yeah.
Part of that is the dark fruit that has blossomed in the situation. And what gets uncovered by the player characters in the course of their investigations in terms of all of this. And it largely starts off by investigating some murders that have been happening. The premise of this is that the violence in Haven over the last couple of weeks or so has been
escalating.
Yeah. And Torgak approaches these powerful, relatively speaking, well-known adepts and asks them to investigate.
Yeah.
Because I think Torgak himself is only maybe 6th circle. Like most of him and his cronies are all around there. So you're talking about player characters that, in terms of their adept powers, are almost on a par with the more prominent members of Haven.
Yeah.
We don't have like 10th and 11th circle characters just kind of hanging around. This is the sort of situation where, you've got some powerful folks. Like 6th circle is nothing to turn your nose up at.
No.
But there is a very definite scrappy underdog aspect of it. And we don't have a super powerful NPC. We don't have an Elminster sitting around that could sort of solve all the problems with a wave of their hand. It's going to require effort on the part of powerful, but still, in the face of the horrors, potentially outclassed individuals.
Yes. 6th circle, since every NPC my players had come up against kind of was doing something else by 6th circle. They'd be running a bar or so forth and so running a town. All of my player characters said, well, at 6th circle, time to retire and ride my reputation for a while.
Yeah.
So they weren't looking past 6th at all. That's where the game kind of stopped for them. It was a joke, but it's still around there. But yes, this is the just you begin to look into what CSI bar save would kind of look like. Hey, go investigate that murder. Is that what we do? It is now. And Dorgak at least is going to offer you a nice reward for it. 500 silver each player character to start with. That's not some chump change. That's pretty nice cash if you can get it. From everything else in this book, that's the biggest payout you're going to find.
Yeah, but also in part because you are the highest circle characters out of all of these, and so would therefore be the ones able to command such a payout.
Also, hey, you're still alive and you're lasted in Haven this long. Guess you're up.
But 500 silver is not going to cover your training costs, say, to go from 4th to 5th circle.
No.
It's not a bad payout as things go.
But it's a good start. So it's nice to have in there. I like the way the adventure was written because there's a lot of, if they ask this question, here's the answer. And if you want to negotiate with Torgak, here's how to do so. And here's how much more you can expect to get out of him. If you want to negotiate that, the reward price or the paying price, whatever the case may be, to touch railroady, again, slightly return to form, because once you're approached with, take this on, and literally the next morning is, well, you're not quite sure how to start your investigation. Some kid comes running in. There's been another murder. So, well, I guess we could go get started now. So you kind of answer the question for your party. How do we get started? Here's how you get started.
Yeah. It is fairly linear. There's not a lot of variation in terms of how things can progress or resolve. It runs into potentially the problem that a lot of mystery adventures rely on, which is that if the player characters miss the clue that progresses things forward, it can kind of stall things out. And there have been any number of games that have been developed over the past few decades that try and address this problem in various ways.
Yeah.
This is the sort of thing where if I were running it, you want to make sure that they get the clue.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody actually fails the perception tech. Like if you have everybody roll them, somebody will roll high enough and you just kind of give the clue to the highest person.
That's what I was going to say, is whoever gets the highest, okay, you're going to have to do. Even though your highest number is a 5, that's going to have to do for this one.
Okay, you notice somebody suspicious hanging around that then suddenly takes off. And so it seems like you should probably follow them.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, the way it's written, and I applaud Sam for doing this, because it said in your initial investigation, because you're called to the crime scene, and he said, here's how they can divine what's going on. The astral sense spell, which a lot of some disciplines get at 1st circle now in 4th edition. The evidence analysis talent, which archers get at 5th circle, wizards get at 5th circle, gauntlets get at 5th circle, and elementalists get at 9th circle, nethermincers get at 9th circle, and weaponsmiths get at 9th circle as options. Nobody gets them as a discipline talent. I looked up on the Matrix last night. Or you could use a threadweaving talent, because everybody gets threadweaving. So as long as you don't have a spellcaster in your party, threadweaving, maybe possibly, roll that. Or you could use your astral sight talent, which most spellcasters get at 1st or 2nd circle as an option. So those are the 4th edition updates to the listed things here to help you pull off your CSI skills, talents, spells, and whatnot. Or now that awareness is a thing as a talent to develop your perception, would awareness be the nice catch-all if your party literally does not have any of those options? Well, threadweaving.
Yeah. There's not a lot of detail on the investigation involved. It is less solving a murder mystery, really, than it is there has been an uptick in the violence. Can you figure out what's behind it? And so you show up at the scene, do a little bit of magical investigation.
Mm-hmm.
As you're checking things out, you notice this, and that kicks off the series of events that go on after that, where it's then just a pursuit of sorts.
Yeah, you're trying to do less Sherlock Holmes solving one murder than you are trying to do the FBI solving a rash of serial killer murders.
It's not even that so much, really. Like, it doesn't even get into that level of the investigation. Like, the identity of the victim doesn't really come into play.
Not at all. It's a body.
I think it's kind of fairly well established, and I don't remember because I have not read this in depth recently.
Me either.
It's fairly clear that it's not like a single person that is doing all of these killings. It's just there has been an uptick in the violence, and can you figure out what kind of dark magic is behind it? And you see some weird magic, and you start following
that trail.
Pun not intended, but you start following the threads. You start pulling on that and just follow where it leads.
Mm-hmm. No, that's entirely it.
Yeah.
You're not wrong. It's so basically in your initial scene, there's a lot of awareness and perception tests aplenty to see if you can notice what's going on. And the game master may have to cajole the players to use the right talents or suggest this or that if the players aren't coming up with it on their own. To your point, mysteries are hard to run.
Yeah.
Especially when it's not a mystery game.
This potentially runs into issues where the player characters, presumably by this point, have done some kind of investigations in the past, have looked into things, have tried to solve murders, kidnappings, various other nefarious activities that have come across their path in various ways, presumably. And so, therefore, would have a reputation that Torgak would come to them to try and investigate this particular problem. I mean, you even have an investigation of sorts that happens in Blood Pact.
Yes.
It's, again, less of actual mystery and more of, okay, you get to the scene, here are a couple of clues that point you to the next thing. There's not a lot of complexity, necessarily, that is involved in the actual investigation. That's more of a pretense to get you on the path of the more action-adventure-y kind of dealing with the problem.
Yeah, follow these breadcrumbs. Go.
Yes. I don't want to necessarily portray that as a bad thing.
No.
When you're looking at pre-published material, especially when you only have so much space, you've got to be efficient. You've got to provide what you need to provide. And if a GM wants to flesh it out in some capacity, they could do so. I mean, it's certainly possible that a game master could take this investigations chapter, which is a single page in the book, right?
Yeah.
And flesh that out into more of an actual investigation.
Totally.
Maybe not necessarily find out who did it so much, but leading to the perpetrator and perhaps getting the clues as a result of investigating or talking to them or something along those lines. Yeah. There is a possibility, especially if you're doing some build-up, to have perhaps the player characters get involved in other death or violence investigations or events that happen leading up to this to kind of expand that particular aspect of things so that they really have a reason beyond, well, Torgak just offered us a fat purse of money to solve the problem. Again, having a group that has a certain amount of investment in the community will make this a little bit easier, especially if they have been there a while and this has been building up in terms of a growing threat. Yeah.
So we've just spent the last 12.5 minutes or so getting you to grab the breadcrumbs or follow the trail, pick up the thread, whatever the case may be. Get hot on this foot. Put some shoe leather in, because the second half of this, like you said, is 1 page long. The whole investigations part, the whole setup part is 1 page long. Once you are on that
trail...
2
pages if you include the bit where Torgak hires you.
Yes, totally. So 2 pages in. After that, if you're on that whole part and you're following that trail, you're putting down the shoe leather. After that, this turns into you have to go into Parlainth. You need to go through the war zone and into the Western Catacombs. I think this is the first time you've gone into the Western Catacombs for Parlainth. I think everything else was like the twists or the Eastern.
Each of the adventures takes place in a different part of the city, which is a nice little bit of variety that happens here as well. It's like not like everything happens in the same place.
Yeah. So this is where you can also draw things out. I mean, if you're going to go through the war zone and you're going to go through Parlainth, you can draw this out, first part in the investigation, since this is a short adventure, as you said, written and confined to the space. You can draw out the investigation part if you want to, and you can draw out getting through Parlainth following your lead.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to leave that nebulous per se. So you can have some interactions going on in the war zone. It is, I can't say time dependent, but if you're following this lead, it could be time dependent based on how you're doing things.
Well,
and who's in your party.
It's time dependent in the sense that the longer it takes you to figure out what's going on and put a stop to it, there is going to be more violence and more people are going to die.
Yes.
Well so while there isn't necessarily a hard limit, there is a little bit of a sense of a tipping, of a ticking clock or growing threat. Yeah.
And so eventually you're going to find in the Western Catacombs this group of, just this group called the Cult of Pain, where you may be ambushed into action, or if the game master wants to, you can be ambushed. They can just be attacked by this cult, or you come across them and you can decide what you want to do. If you're taking too long, of course, that's when I, as the game master, would say, screw this, I'm just going to ambush you to get you guys to do something instead of, bickering all day long as to what course of action you're going to take. But that's pretty much the main thing there. Once you encounter the cult, you have to figure out who's behind the Cult of Pain, and that, naturally, because it's Earth Dawn, is a horror.
Yes, and this is where we get into the whole background situation of what has been going on.
Yeah.
During the Scourge, among their attempts to fight the horrors or find ways to protect themselves while they were trapped during the Scourge, some magicians trapped a horror and were trying to turn its powers to their advantage, doing some kind of experiment or desperate kind of stuff in order to try and protect themselves and keep themselves alive, that locked one of the magicians and the horror into this very long-term duel of wills, where eventually the magician succumbed to the horror, and the two have sort of merged into something that is referred to in this as the Abomination, which is basically a horror that's got a whole bunch of wizard powers. Echoes of Vestraven, honestly.
Oh, yeah.
In this. What's going on is that the Abomination has been sending out thoughtworms, these tendrils of corrupted magical energy, that burrow into people and bring them into the cult.
Yeah.
The Cult of Pain being the co-opted victims of the horror, and the increase in violence and so forth is the horror working its will and causing people to go a little bit, to snap and, attack each other and so forth.
Agreed.
So that's kind of what we find out here. It's possible in this initial encounter with the cult that they kind of find out, there's this sort of dark master that they're referring to that we need to go along with. And then you descend into the probably biggest part of the adventure, certainly in terms of its write-up, which is essentially a little bit of a dungeon crawl, a little complex within the Western Catacombs that's got a bunch of rooms and a bunch of encounters and stuff that can happen there that hopefully, depending on the route that they go, they learn some information and find out some stuff about what's going on. But it ultimately culminates in a battle against the horror.
Yeah. So this is, to your point, this is your Kaer crawl with traps, obstacles, towards the eventual lair of the Abomination named horror itself. Cadaver men, cultists, some ghouls, maybe a bog gob, things like that. And so you could still, again, if you wanted to, draw this out if you want. You don't have to use the map here. By all means, if you like it, use it. If you want to make it bigger and longer, go for it. Make it as complex as you want to. So to your point, this was written for space and the constraints of the amount of pages you could use, but you can stretch out this adventure into a longer one if you want to. But again, the ticking clock of solving this, because, if you defeat the Abomination, probably the thoughtworms die and stop infecting the rest of Haven.
Right. The Abomination is a very difficult opponent.
Yes!
As it should be, given the scale of the threat that it poses, because if it's not stopped, Haven is ultimately going to erupt into masses of violence, of people attacking and killing each other and causing lots of pain and suffering that the horror is just going to drink up.
Yeah. I mean, this is meant for 6 to 8 players of 4th to 5th circle. That's some heavy duty. Yeah.
The Abomination's attribute stats are all in the teens. Again, looking at first edition stat blocks.
Yeah, sure.
Its defense ratings are in the mid to upper teens. It's got multiple attacks with decent attack and damage. It's got spells. It's got 20 points of both mystic and physical armor. Again, first edition rules make those not quite as scary as they would be in 4th. It doesn't move. It's just in one place.
Yeah.
And depending on how extensively the characters investigate the catacombs before facing it, they may learn of a weakness that allows them to have it be distracted for a little bit, which gives them some opportunity to beat on it without taking as much of a brunt themselves.
Agreed. I mean, yeah, all the physical defense, social defense, spell defense are, 15, 15, 18. Holy crap. 20 points of armor, 20 points of mystic armor, and your death rating's 100. So you're going to be there a while.
Yeah. It is a significant fight. Yeah, and that's not even throwing the fact that you could potentially throw in horror karma on top of it. It's 30 points at step 12.
And the spells that it has.
It's got the equivalent of Circle 8 Wizard spells. So there are some nasty spells that are in that repertoire.
Yeah, up through Circle 8. Yeah, by all means, pick the good ones.
So, yeah, as it is, it's a really good short-ish framework that does involve some investigation, but more is a Earth Dawn flavored dungeon crawl sort of thing.
Yeah.
Where you're trying to thwart the plot of the big bad, in this case being a horror that is finally broken free of the constraints that it has been under for decades.
Yeah.
But it is certainly something that if you have a game that is based in and around Haven, where the group has done other stuff, whether the other adventures in here or ones of your own making, and developed a reputation, you could start laying the seeds for this earlier and build this up as a culmination of an arc of sorts.
Yeah.
What is presented here is relatively linear in that you are asked to do this thing and you follow it from place to place, culminating in a big fight against a nasty opponent.
Yeah.
Kind of traditional, but no less cool and interesting because of what's going on there.
And the only other thing about it is you don't get to take your time. I mean, you can, but you also know that if you do, other people get hurt, other people get killed. And so, yeah, it's a very linear, slightly traditional framework, but you got to kind of go at this slightly increased pace than maybe you're prepared for, maybe you want to. And so you're always kept a little bit, the player characters are always kept a little bit off guard by not being able to rest, recuperate, and go. They have to, really plan this out, do it well, be safe and measured, but still try and get things done quickly. So I like it for that little ticking clock in the back of their head.
Yeah.
It's fun that way. I've run this one, and I don't remember anything that happened with it. I really don't.
I have not run this one. I'm pretty sure, anyway, that I have not run this one.
I have notes on it, but I didn't consult my notes. I just wanted to consult everything else about what was different in 4th edition. So, like I said, the CSI bar save part, I think, would be the hardest thing to overcome, which is make sure they pick up on the breadcrumbs that you're laying down.
Yes, I agree, but there are plenty of established ways that you can fudge that or nudge the group in the right direction.
Suggestions are welcome at this point.
Yeah. Sidebar here about mystery plots, mystery adventures, and the difficulties in running them.
Do it.
And that is mostly that it is most prevalent within mysteries, but it is true really of any kind of adventure or scenario design, which is that generally speaking, you don't want to gate the progress of the adventure behind a single thing that could fail.
Yeah.
That if you are going to be running a mystery, an investigation, you generally need to probably put like 3 times as many clues in there as you think, and you probably need to make the clues relatively obvious
Yeah.
What may seem to you as the GM to be painfully obvious because you already know the solution, which is not necessarily the case. Frequently, the solution to those kinds of bottleneck issues when it comes to investigations is to just give the players the information that they need in order to progress things.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's Gumshoe. Is a game developed by Robin Laws, incidentally. I think he was one of the ones that worked on it. I think it was Robin worked on that one. But basically, the premise of Gumshoe, it is an investigative game, largely developed out of frustration with the way that investigations were run in Call of Cthulhu.
Fair.
The primary bit of idea on Gumshoe is that there are clues in the scene. The characters are going to get the clues.
Yes.
Successful tests provide them with maybe additional information or additional context, but they're not going to prevent you from being able to progress the story.
Yeah.
One thing that I have seen more recently, and this just because I want to talk about it because I think it's a fascinating idea. I think it first showed up in a game called Brindlewood Bay.
Mm-hmm.
Brindlewood Bay is sort of like Murder, She Wrote crossed with Lovecraftian horror.
Nice.
Player characters are all elderly folk living in a small town that investigate mysteries. They're all part of the knitting circle. When I say Murder, She Wrote, I'm not kidding.
I don't think you were.
The way that the mysteries and the investigations work in that, and it's also been adapted in Apocalypse Keys, which is sort of like Hellboy, the RPG.
Gotcha.
The idea is that there is a mystery, but the game master does not have a solution in mind ahead of time.
Yeah.
They have characters, and any of the NPCs involved could potentially have had reason to do it or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then depending on the results of tests and the clues that are uncovered and given out, the player characters come up with their own theory as to what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're like, well, we think it's this. And then they make a test. And if they succeed, then that is the solution. They sort of create the solution out of their own
conclusions.
Out of their own conclusions. And so there is no way to ultimately fail to solve the mystery.
Mm-hmm.
You will solve it. And there's surprise on everybody's part because the game master doesn't necessarily know
either.
Like, there's no way for the game master to force things or steer them along to a particular conclusion because the game master ideally shouldn't know ahead of time what's going on. And it's more like how the characters and their particular backgrounds and personalities have them interpret the clues and information that they have to come to certain conclusions. Yeah. And is this conclusion accurate? I don't know. Let's roll and find out.
Looks like it is.
It's really interesting as another way of presenting, like, mystery plots.
Yeah.
And again, something that's probably more comfortable with folks that are willing to improvise and not feel like they need to have control over everything.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a fascinating little idea.
Fair. I've also come across something recently where I've learned over the last few years to do gradations of a perception roll. And so it's, if they get a minimum roll, they notice a thing. If they get slightly higher than that, they notice something about that thing. If they get another level of success, they get two things about that thing.
Right.
And if
we have that in the Legends of Barsave, the ones that are more like specifically investigatory.
Yeah.
The perception test, like the base difficulty, you are guaranteed to get this information, which is enough to allow you to move forward. But the more successes you get, the more details you get, so that you provide context as to like motive or various other things that aren't strictly necessary in order to progress the story, but provide a little bit richer and more nuanced and detailed experience.
Yeah. And I figure if they gather that item up and they spend some time with it, then of course that familiarity lowers the next target number and they can try it again after a certain amount of time. So no matter what, you're trying to not necessarily spoon feed them the answer, but allow for time, familiarity, and level of success along the way. So you're not like kneecapping them to say, you'll never know this.
You're not kneecapping the investigation. You're not gating the progress of the story behind a test that needs to succeed.
Yeah.
Like in Gumshoe, they will get the information that they need in order to sort of move on to the next step of their investigation.
Mm-hmm.
It just might be that they miss out on some additional details that shed some light into a little bit more info about what's going on, but it doesn't prevent them from moving forward.
Yeah. So they may have an aha moment later on, which is fine. Those happen
Or not.
in mysteries. Or not.
They might never really understand everything that's going on, which is fine.
But, just some other little helpful hints if you're going to run a mystery campaign.
Yeah.
Especially in Earth Dawn, since that's what we're talking about. So any further thoughts? I like this one. It's, like you said, it's the bookends. Fairly straightforward. First adventure, fairly straightforward. Second adventure, the two fun ones in the middle are kind of a little less linear, and they're more fun that way, but don't have to run them in that order. But this one I recommend definitely running last.
Yeah, well, again, because the other adventures are all for lower circle characters, if that's what you're going to be doing, this one would be later just because of the advancement.
Yeah.
It's good. It's sort of traditional. It's fantasy, but with an Earth Dawn twist. You've got a nasty horror as the opponent, and one that could potentially cause quite a bit of problems in Haven if left unmolested for too long.
Agreed. And you have to go face the horror without as much background as you may be wanting, but that's part of the challenge.
Well, there is plenty of opportunity within the catacomb complex prior to facing the horror that allows you to learn about some weaknesses. There are some rooms in the catacombs that allow you to get enhancements and stuff that would make the fight against the horror a little bit better, because you are sort of going through the laboratory space that the Theron wizards and magicians were using to try and develop their defenses and protections against the horrors that were trapped there with them. And so you can take advantage of some of those things in order to boost defenses or gain power.
Yeah.
On a short-term basis, but enough to make the fight against the Abomination a little bit more tenable.
Agreed. I like this one. I recommend all four of them for their own each idiosyncrasies, and they're a beautifully collected set. So if you're stationed around Parlainth and Haven, by all means, get to these, as well as the Haven collection, the Legends of Barsave. So all worth it. I think this is a fantastic introduction. So until next time, folks, go follow the breadcrumbs for your legend.
Good night, everybody.